Hi, it's Mark Fielding-Pritchard here from AME Fielding. We haven't done some of these videos for a long time now. We used to try and post one once a week, but we kind of fell away due to pressures of work. And also because of the move. We've moved from the United States to America now, back to the United Kingdom. So those of you who are watching this, I imagine, I hope that nearly all of you are ACCA students. Paper P5, nearly at the end now, a couple more papers, and you're going to push on through and become ACCA qualified. So I really hope we can help you do that. Paper P5 is an odd little paper. It's an odd paper because back in the day when I first started teaching, there used to be two papers. One was called the old Paper 9, and Paper 9 was the top level management accounting paper. And then that was followed on by another paper, which I think was Paper 12, or was it Paper 13? I think maybe Paper 13. And Paper 13 was the strategy paper. Both of those papers were criticised in that there wasn't enough meat in them. There wasn't enough technical knowledge that students were learning. It was much more test of presentation skills. So what the ACCA has done is it's combined those two papers together into this paper, which is paper number P5. So you've got elements of strategy. So in fact, what's going to happen to you is you're going to be given a 3 or 4 page report on a company, and then it'll just say comment on it, 50 marks. So that will be the sort of strategy side of it. And then on the other side of it, they've also pulled in areas of the management accounting. So there's things like target costing, there's things like overhead allocation, all the way back to the old paper 3 there. So we've got this kind of mix here in this paper. So this is paper P5. I think so far I've written about 8 or 9 of these things. So there's going to be something of the order of 8 to 10 of these lectures. So 8 to 10 topics. Probably each one will be 2 or 3 lectures. So that's where you are anyway with paper P5. So you're going to get like 25 classes or something on this. And as always, we've backed it up with old ACCA questions. So the company that I'm working for has provided me with Kaplan books, which is where I've taken the questions from. But the questions are all old ACCA questions. So if you can't be bothered going and spending whatever, £100 or something on the Kaplan books, then I'll give you them, and you can go to the ACCA website and download the questions for free. Okay, let's move on into the slides. I think the first slide is more on the same, actually. Okay, if you've got to go on a paper P5, then we shouldn't really have to put too much of an emphasis on exam approach, on how you should study, and what the examiners are kind of looking for. If you've got this far, you're obviously pretty good at working this stuff out. But having said that, I will go through it because it's so important to this paper. Let's just do the format of the exam first because it's fairly straightforward. You're going to get 4 questions. Question number 1 will be compulsory. It's going to be half of the exam, which is 50 marks. It'll be broken down into A, B, C, D. Each one will be, who knows, often certainly large parts of it are 15 marks each. You'll be given a case study. So the case study will be 2, 3, 4 pages on the situation that exists in a particular type of business, and then you'll be asked to comment on it. So that you will be told that, for example, we have a company which operates 10 supermarkets, and what's happening to them is that they are being squeezed by the major national companies. So you have to provide some advice on what it is that they should do, and there will be some other stuff in the question as well. So that's going to be question number 1. Question number 2, or the other part, section B of the exam, if you like, there'll be 3 questions, and you choose 2, and they're 25 marks each. Sorry, just to say, question 1, what it says there will be mainly discursive. That means you have to write, so there's not so many calculations. Questions number 2, 3, and 4, of which you choose 2, there is likely to be more of a management accounting element. So you'll even see things like activity-based costing and so on coming up. Target costing, and there'll be certainly one part of it will be sort of management accounting based. Other things will be, business process re-engineering, talking about quality. Quality is a big topic in this subject as well. So areas like that. So that's the format of the exam. If you're going to buy the Kaplan book or the old book, and again, this isn't like tax that changes every year, so buy one that's a couple of years old. Yeah, the questions haven't really changed that much. I think the last examiner, the examiner came in about 2010. Well, you can download the questions, of course, from the ACCA website. Right, this is the last part, the third thing which is written on there. I really, really hope that by the time you sat through 2 or 3 of these lectures, you're absolutely sick of me going structure, structure, structure. But this is what it's all about. If you're planning on failing this, then it's very easy to fail. What will happen in question number 1 is that they will give you a scenario and they will say comment on the strategy, and students will begin to write, and then they write and they write and they write, and then they go off at tangents. What is really, really important is that you stick on track. Okay, this is meant to be a professional report. Now, the way that the timing of this exam works is that unlike most other exams, your time pressure will not be murderously critical in this. There still obviously will be time pressure, but you will have time to do things like do a plan. Now, what we're going to do as we go through this course is that I'm going to talk to you about various individuals who have written various theories. Now, you might think, well, why do I care about that? Well, the reason that you care about that is that you take a guy's theory and then you use it as a structure. What you're looking for all the time is to look for an accepted structure to your answer. So Michael Porter says, and usually the way to do it is that Michael Porter says there are 5 forces, so you list the 5 forces and write one line on what they are, and then you apply them to the scenario. You will get marks for giving the generic part of the answer. You will get marks for the specifics, and obviously a good answer will have the explanation of the theory and then the application of the theory to the scenario. That is what you are looking to do all the way through. If you are looking to fail, then just start to write and you'll go. Now, I told you that in the good old days there was a management accounting part and then there was the strategy part. They were 2 completely different papers, even at different levels, paper 9 and I think it was paper 12 or 13. Particularly in those ones, they were exams that students sat down and they went, there's nothing to study here. What am I studying? Consolidation is this big topic. Then there's what's now paper P2, which is the big accounting paper at the end, is a big topic, big paper. I sit down to study, I do a couple of questions, 2 hours have gone by. There's just nothing chunky in this. You need to learn this stuff, who these people are, because certainly the latest examiner will say, what do Moon and Fitzgerald think about this? And if you don't know what Moon and Fitzgerald wrote, then you're a little bit stuffed. So you can guess to some degree. But right, this is the format of the exam. That's relatively straightforward. Obviously, question number 1 is the one to focus on. The last part you must keep, and I'm not going to let you forget this. At the start of every question, the first line will be structure, structure, structure. You have time in the exam to write plans. Now get that into your head. So when you're doing discursive stuff, jot down some notes, and then as you're going through your answer, go back to the plan and make sure that you're on track and you're not going off topic, going on for too long, the way that I probably am now. Okay? Structure, structure, structure. Phenomenally important. Right, slide number 3 therefore is just more of the same. Slide number 3 is just ramming home this idea, and this is the most important thing you will learn all the way through this, of structure, structure, structure. So it says here we'll require a framework to examine a situation. You'll obviously be given the situation in the exam, and it's up to you to come up with the framework itself. So to put that framework in place. Now it says that you may be able to choose. That's quite common as well. The examiner doesn't always say use Fitzgerald and Moon, for example. Fitzgerald and Moon, if you have no idea who they are, we'll cover them at some point during these lectures. So we'll have a choice. There'll be 3 or 4 guys all wrote about quality, and you can pick any one of them. So you can pick Kaizen or Six Sigma or whatever. Pick one, just pick one, and it actually doesn't matter. As far as the examiner is concerned, if you're marking at that paper P5, then who cares? So you actually get to choose. Obviously, you have to choose an appropriate one. If you choose something on quality and the question is asking you about strategy of moving into a new country, you're going to be fairly limited. So you must get this idea of a framework, and you're already getting bored of me saying that. Good, be bored. You need to know this. Right, you may be able to choose. So yes, you may be able to choose which one, and you will get 4 or 5 different variants of the same thing. And number 3, as you've already understood, it is the most important part of the whole bloody exam. So get it now, do it, and just get over this thing, and then be qualified and never have to sit through these wretched lectures again. Okay, so we've looked at the basis of the exam, we've looked at the format of the exam, we've looked at what you need to do in this concept of structure. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to move on to the tools that are available to us. So what do we actually do? So the first one that I've put up here, and I put this one up first because this is actually one of my favourites because it makes nice sense to me. I don't think from the research that I've ever done and looking through the textbooks that have ever existed that this was ever a formal theory, but it is in your textbooks. Right, now let's just look at how you apply this and where actually are we. We're now looking at question 1 in the exam. Question 1 is going to give you a scenario. So let's assume that question number 1 is going to give you a scenario. Let's assume that we have a husband and wife who want to open a restaurant in Greece. So they want to give up their jobs in Britain, move to Greece and open a restaurant. You'll be given certain information about whether they have any skills about cooking or not. You'll be given any skills about whether they have any ideas about how to run a restaurant and so on and so forth. So you'll be given a minimum of 2 pages of information. The information will be a complete splurge, so it will be all over the place. And your job is to pull that information into a professional report. The way to do that is to do it within a structure. So environmental analysis gives you a structure. So in terms of where we are now, question 1 in the exam, you've been given a scenario. You have 2 people who are British, living and working in Britain, who are going to give up their jobs to sell their house in Britain and go to Greece. Okay, that's my pretend scenario. But I want you to understand what it is that you're actually doing. Because this isn't a topic like consolidation where I can show you one way to do it. We're going to give you 4 or 5 different tools. Come the exam, you will have to choose a tool and then apply that tool to a scenario. So it's much more now of application of knowledge. And you will see here that there is nothing that you can learn about that. You can't open the textbook and there isn't 10 pages on what happens when you open a restaurant in Greece. You will have to pluck the information from the question. For those of you who in later life want to go on and be consultants as opposed to having a regular job with a fixed company, this is actually very, very useful as well because you will effectively playing the role of a consultant. You go into an organisation, you ask them what's wrong with their organisation, how they would make it better, then you write it down and consolidate it or put it into a report, and then you sell it back to the company itself. And that's what you're doing here. So plucking from the question is what the skill that's required. The 2 examiners back as well, the guy said he didn't like bullet points, but can I say that as a marker, I like bullet points, and I would use bullet points if I can. Here's the problem, here's how you fix it, and here's what will happen. And you must get this idea of problem identification, problem solving, and developing points. Right, back to our scenario. I've made up and given you the scenario about restaurants in Greece. You are going to apply environmental analysis. So first of all, the political situation. So what is the political situation? Presumably, what is the political situation here? You could say what's happening in Britain. So the economy is hoping to be picked up, but not really very much happening at the moment. Political situation in Greece is much more volatile, and I would seriously question, would you really want to move to Greece at the moment? So within political, we're looking at this framework of ideas of what is the political environment. Are they, for example, as many countries across Europe are having big political swings against immigrants? Are they looking to give out, you'll see that these will fit across various different category headings as well. So is the government looking to provide money for government grants? If you're going to open a Greek restaurant in Greece as well, are people going to come to it in Greece? So, but political, we have this idea of what's happening in the political situation. And I chose Greece because it's very, very volatile at the moment. So the political situation and how is the country going. Economic as well. So economically, what's happening with the government? We see that in America, for example, it's currently where are we now? August 2015. So economically, America is growing, whereas we see in Greece austerity measures. And so Greece, therefore, is likely to see an economic contraction. That will have a big effect on the restaurant industry because as people's disposable incomes fall, they will have less and less opportunity to go on holiday. They'll have less and less opportunity to spend money in restaurants. Right, so this is what you're doing therefore. You're going through the question. You will be given information in the question. So wherever you can, pluck from the question. Where you're not given information, then you can use your common sense to make statements. Be careful with those statements. Be careful how far you go, though. You cannot go and say, well, economic problems have been caused by repeated fraud in the government. You have no evidence of that. So what you do have evidence from the newspapers of economic problems. Political problems. What's the current political situation in Greece? Fairly volatile. Economic situation, contraction of the economy. People, I believe, are being given maximums of 50 or 60 euros a day they can draw out of the banks and so on. Possible bank failures. Who knows what's going to come next? Right, social. So what's happening socially in Greece? Well, tied in with those things again. Socially, what's happening in Greece, and I'm guessing from what I've read in the paper, I haven't been to Greece recently, I'm guessing therefore that there's a sense of unhappiness of the people, but when you look at the people, they're not looking at being confident in the future growth of the economy. Therefore, they're probably looking more to save money. If they're not confident in the banks, they'll be looking to buy assets. So people will be buying gold or other assets, people buy new cars and things, so that they know that that thing will be there for them in the future. Socially, therefore, are people going to be wanting to go spend lots of money on restaurants? Maybe. If they think that their money's worthless, they might as well spend it. You get that attitude as well. So maybe. You need to make some comment on what you think is happening socially in Greece. Again, the examiner will normally guide you on these things. Okay, so political, economic, and social. Now, in terms of the exam, therefore, you've got 3 headings. Remember this idea, make a plan. So you make a plan, and then under there, if it's 15 marks, you've got 7 of these things. You're looking for 1 or 2 things. You make the point socially, social unrest, riots, potentially high unemployment, which, again, you can put under economic or you can put under social. So therefore, good news or bad news to restaurants? Pretty bad news overall, yeah? So develop these points. Technology. I'm not really sure how technology is affecting the restaurant industry. Certainly things like the internet are. Things like internet online booking. You can organise takeaways. You can now join all of these sets like Eat Me UK, I think one of them is called. I'm in Abu Dhabi at the moment, so Food on Click here in Abu Dhabi. So you can put the name of your restaurant down under these things. In terms of the kitchens, I'm not going to pretend I know what's happening technologically in terms of the food industry. Certainly ordering processes, if you want to go in and you put iPads on people's desks and they choose, and then if they want to call the waiter, they hit a button, otherwise the waiter doesn't bother them, and so on and so forth. So these things I don't think so much in food preparation. Presumably you get more accurate kitchen appliances. I wouldn't have imagined in terms of a restaurant that this was a huge issue, actually. Technologically, is it a huge issue? Certainly not going to have the impact on your answer that social, economic and political are if we're looking at a country like Greece. Put it in there, write something sensible. Demographics, I don't know what the demographics are in Greece either. Assuming it's a typical European country, what's happening is that the population is getting older. Older people go out to restaurants less. They tend to view it more as a treat. And I have to say that that's based on my knowledge in Britain and America. That's not based on my knowledge in Greece. Maybe it's different in Greece. You'd have to have a look at the question. I would imagine that the demographics for opening a Greek restaurant in Greece are not so desperately important. You may find, however, that there is a backlash against certain types of Europeans, or there may be a backlash against immigrants, and that may well be worth looking at. Technological and demographic, you might want to say something, but they're not big areas. Right, legal and government, much bigger areas again. Legal, certainly there's going to be health and safety, so if you're going to open up a business, you have to look at the bureaucracy. What kind of licenses do you need? So you're going to have fire, health and safety, hygiene and so on. How easy is it to rent a building? I would imagine fairly easy in Greece at the moment. Often, many countries or some countries have sort of parallel legal systems, so what the law says and then what really happens, and you need to understand what really happens and make sure that you have someone to guide you through that. I'm certainly not going to accuse Greek civil servants of corruption because I have no evidence whatsoever of that, but those kinds of areas, what they consider important, what's not important, and how you move through the process to get the restaurant open. Remembering that if you're renting a building and you're leasing kitchen equipment, going from the point where you have to get that restaurant open, so going from nothing to opening the door, you want to keep that as short a period as possible. So therefore, in terms of the legal processes, how do you register for tax? How do you register for VAT? Do you have to pay VAT if it's food, and so on and so forth. So those kind of things will be very important as well. Finally, I imagine at the moment hugely important will be the role of the government. So the government will be certainly part of this legal thing. Where do we get our licenses and so on and so forth for? Do they give you, or government grants? And one of the first things you would look at in a country like, in a business like that, government grants, hiring people, remembering that chefs and so on are skilled employees, so you can take on assistants as apprentices. What government grants are available for the purchase of capital goods, because all of your kitchen will be capital goods, and everything else as well about the government at the moment. What is the government doing? Is it raising taxes? Is it lowering taxes? You're going to open a restaurant and they're going to start raising taxes to 60-70% on any profits you make. It's going to be a tough. A restaurant business is horrible at the best of times. It's going to be worse under this. Okay, let's just go back in review. If you're at Paper P5, you're smart enough to learn all of this, and you're probably looking at this going, where's the meat? Where's the meat? You know, there is no meat. But what are you learning? You are learning certain tools which will give you a structure for the 50-mark question. I've invented this scenario. It's not an ACCA scenario. You've got two people who are leaving Britain, going to Greece to open a restaurant. So you can apply these, there's 7 different things there. And you put them in any order that you want. And some things, what's the difference between political and the government? Well, who knows? So you've got an item that could go in both. It just doesn't matter. Put it in one of them. But if this is going to be worth 15 or 20 marks, you've got 7 things there. Identify the issue, and start with the question. Most of them will be in the question. 6 or 7 of these things will be in the question. Identify the issue. Explore the issue using your own common sense. Be careful how far you take it, and then draw some sort of fact from it. Currently, it's going to be difficult for a foreigner going to Greece to open a restaurant because of the political situation, because of the economic situation. If you're not Greek and you don't have Greek family, how are you going to deal with the legal situation? How are you going to deal with the government? This is all stuff. Write those things in your plan as 7 headings, and this is what they're doing. They will drive you to stay on track, so you force the marker to give you 25 of those 50 marks. 26 if you're really lucky. That's what you're using this thing for, and that's what you have to be clear on. There is nothing behind this. There's something in there, a fact you need to learn. You learn the headings. If on the day you forget 2 of them and you only got 5 of them, it doesn't matter. You still got a structure of 5 things. Okay, that is environmental analysis. Right, this is just a derivation of environmental analysis. I like environmental analysis better than PEST because it looks at more areas which very frequently are relevant. We actually use these things in real life, and when we were using them in real life, looking for government organisations in the former Soviet Union that were looking to be privatised, things like demographics and so on were very, very important, and PEST misses them out, but it does the same thing. So under our 4 headings in our scenario, looking at our 2 Brits who want to open a restaurant in Greece, political, therefore you'd be looking at the political situation, and therefore you'd include the government in this. And you just group the things, government and legal would come under political, I guess, therefore. Social would be the same, what's actually happening in society to people, and what's fashionable, what's not fashionable, and so on. Economic, the fact that the economy is down the toilet. And then furthermore, technology. Technology, I'm not really sure. I'm not an expert on the restaurant industry. I don't imagine it's moving that fast. Cookers, these things that you cook food on, these machines, I imagine that they're getting more efficient, they're getting more accurate, they're getting faster. Certainly in restaurants, ordering techniques. Many restaurants now have these iPad things where you order the food, you see pictures of it, and you can call a waiter on these things. And I've seen those in several places now. So those kind of things with technology. I don't think in terms of technology those things are really groundbreaking. You still have to have a guy who knows how to prepare the food somewhere. What would be the real earth shakers would be political and economic, I think, in somewhere like Greece, and maybe social as well. If you're going to put your restaurant in a big tourist area, then what's happening to the tourist trade and so on. Derivation of the last thing. The one thing I wish my phone was not doing that. The one thing that I would say here is that this is easier to remember. I don't have a name to give you anyone who's invented this. When we come to later theories and formulas, you'll see that there's names that go with them. Please stop. Yeah, but here I don't. But just remember that in the exam, again, you're given your scenario and you can apply those 4 boxes, and you'll just have more points under each box. Maybe in that sense it's easier. With environmental analysis, sometimes students find they don't have anything to say under one of them, whereas here you'll have something to say under each 4. Try to keep it a bit of an even split as well. Don't focus everything under political, so 10 points under political and 1 under each of the other 3. Try and get 2 or 3 points under each. Okay. So the first 2 things that we looked at in terms of our environmental analysis and our PEST analysis are kind of generic items for a generic strategy. Now what's happening as we come on to slide number 6 is that we have a specific guy who's given us a specific checklist for a specific situation. So Michael Porter is telling us here now that we have what he calls the Michael Porter 5 forces. And these are the 5 forces that shape industry competition. And I just said that, you can read it from the slide. So please remember now your specific situation, because if you get something in an exam and it says, well, what will affect competition, then click should go off in your mind and you should jump to the 5 forces. So Michael Porter says, therefore, that we have an industry. So let's change industry. Let's move away from Greek restaurants. Let's look at training companies in Moscow. I used to own a training company in Moscow. So let's look at training companies in Moscow. And let's have a look at this. So there were various training companies in Moscow of various sizes offering various products. So in terms of that, what therefore was the industry competition? Now what you're going to do therefore is that you're going to have therefore these 5 things, and there are 5, remember that there are 5 of them. And then again, what are we actually doing here? This is going to be question number 1. You're going to be given a scenario. So there are a number of training companies in Moscow. One training company is looking at how it deals with its competitors. How do we deal with the tactics and strategy and so on? You now have a structure. You have Michael Porter's, let's get this right, Michael Porter's 5 forces. So these 5 forces, as far as you're concerned, give you 5 different headings. So let's start at the top level. Threat of new entrants. What is the threat of new entrants to the Moscow training market? Well, it's fairly big, yeah. Certainly when I was out there, nearly all of the trainers at that time and nearly all of the training companies were foreign. There were no major Russian training companies, and within those training companies there were very, very few native Russians. So we're in Russia rather, and there's very, very few native Russians that are going into this as a business or as a trade. And that, I have to say, is something that continued for many, many years. And it was also always a huge surprise to me, because we were churning out 200 to 300 qualified ACCAs a year. And it's always struck me that some of these people must look at this and think, I just never want to do another bloody audit again in my life. And so therefore, on the basis of that, why don't I go out and open up my own training company and go into the market and compete with these guys to do, leadership training, to do ACCA and so on and so forth. And I have to be honest, it never really happened. But as an analysis, the threat of new entrants, if you're looking at doing a scenario, the threat of new entrants is very, very high. Because the barriers to entry are very, very low to open a training company. Certainly what most new training companies do is they publish a list that there will be 20 different courses, and then what happens is that they see how many people enroll for those courses, and they cancel all of the courses where they don't get more than, let's say, 3 people. Most of the companies I do work for charge fees where at 4 people on a course, they're kind of breaking even. So they'll run a course of 4 people. Right, Moscow training, threat of new entrants is fairly high because the barriers to entry are low. If you're in the electricity generating industry, then barriers to entry monstrously high. The threat of new entrants, large number of intelligent, qualified people who presumably can present. Buy yourself some textbooks, rent yourself a room, and away you go. Right, the bargaining power of suppliers. So this means how much strength do suppliers have? If you have a product that you absolutely have to have, and there's only one supplier, then the bargaining power of the supplier is very, very high. Go to the other end of the market where you're buying unskilled labour. I mean, I'm here in Abu Dhabi at the moment. Unskilled labour is phenomenal. People desperate to get here to work. So the bargaining power of the suppliers is zero. You get told this is what you're going to get. If you don't like it, then thank you and good night. In Moscow training industry, bargaining power of suppliers is relatively low. For the simple reason that your product, which is training, is not a critical product to your process. If the big four accountancy firms decide that they don't want training courses for their students, probably nothing will happen, other than it will save them however $2-3 million a year. If you looked at it, you could say, well, people learn more, they pass their ACCA, higher caliber of graduates will want to join them, etc., etc. But in the short term effect is nothing. And the students should be unhappy, but the short-term effect is nothing. So the bargaining power of the suppliers is relatively low, and the buyers do everything to take that away from you. On the basis of that, therefore, there's not really much to say. When you look at the bargaining power of the buyers, I tend to a large degree will tend to mirror that of the suppliers. If the suppliers are low, then the buyers by definition ought to be fairly high. Again, when we look at ACCA training for big four accountancy firms, there's various forces at work there. The firms themselves have to be shown to be doing training. Training's an odd thing. It's something everybody wants. Everyone says how important it is, but nobody ever wants to pay money for it, or even give people off work time to do it. So the bargaining power of the buyers is this idea that they can go, no, we don't want it, but there is a kind of moral pressure coming behind them. Bottom line is that as far as Moscow training was concerned, the bargaining power of the buyers was higher. Certainly the big four accountancy firms made it higher because they used to band together as a consortium. So certainly from the early days, they would come together as a group. So you'd get sort of a team of 8 people, 2 from each of the big four firms, and they as a committee would then purchase ACCA training for all of those 4 firms. As they went further on down the line, they broke out. PwC started to do it themselves, and I think some of the other firms just stopped. I think Deloitte stopped. Some Ernst & Young went down the route of putting some through ICAEW, which was not a particularly good move. So that actually mitigated some of the power of the buyers. If you look though just at pure ACCA training back, certainly around the year sort of 2000, it was relatively strong. Right, the threat of substitutes, products or services is high here. So we've got the 3. The threat of new entrants is high. Bargaining power of suppliers is low. Bargaining power of buyers is high. You see, it's not really a great market to be in yet, which is why I got out of it. The threat of substitute products or services is high if you accept that nothing is a substitute. If you say, well, we could just do nothing, and which is what most of them ultimately decided to do, then what happens is that the threat of substitutes pushes you again. It makes rivalry more intense, because as a supplier, the more the pressure is on you, then the higher the level of rivalry is. So the threat of substitutes was higher. What certainly did happen over time was that the firms fanned out. So they stuck in core with ACCA, but then we saw some CIMA coming through, we saw some ICAEW coming through. CIMA became particularly popular with companies that were doing CIMA in other countries. So we had Unilever, for example, Mars. Manufacturing organisations switched over to CIMA. That, in terms of Michael Porter, is a factor that's worth mentioning. As a training company, you're still earning revenue from running CIMA courses. So it's not like stopping doing ACCA and going and doing an apprenticeship in aircraft mechanics or something. You are not being substituted out of the picture. You're just moving people from one classroom to another. It has a big effect on training companies, that for a very simple reason, that as a training company, your costs are fixed, but your revenue is variable. You have a guy in a hotel room. That cost is largely fixed. If not fixed, it's certainly stepped. the more people you can cram into that hotel room to sit and listen to him, the more profit you make. What happens when you switch students from ACCA to CIMA is you now need 2 rooms, so your cost base has just doubled. So it's not something that you can just ignore, but it's not a direct substitute that reduces revenue to 0, or you hope. Of course, when they get, and we've got these 2 guys, and we expect you to train them as well, so you're running loss-making courses, having to fly a guy out from Britain to teach some statistics or something, then it becomes much worse. So we've got this strange idea, and it's something as well that we certainly saw with certain companies in Moscow where we've got the idea of coaching. Coaching is this idea you have with airlines. When I buy a ticket on British Airways, you buy a ticket on Emirates, and when we get there, we're on the same plane. We certainly ran courses with other training companies, so we had 3 or 4 different people, all from different training companies, but one room, because you cut your costs to a third. So then, as a training company, you can offer a service to a client in the hope it will grow in the future. You've got 2 students in a class, and you're still making $500 a day or whatever. Right, those are your 4 main things there. So your threat of new entrants, Moscow training company very high, bargaining power of suppliers low, bargaining power of buyers relatively high, threat of substitutes. If you accept that nothing is a substitute, then it's very high as well. Right, those 4 things therefore bring you to the central circle, rivalry amongst existing competitors, and the rivalry was very high. Certainly back in the day when 3-4 companies were tendering at the same time, the prices were down to the point where the tender prices were running at best break even. So in other words, somebody would tender, they would win a contract for the Big 4. At best, that offered them enough money to break even. The reason was because then what happened was you got the non-Big 4 students in the classroom, and the non-Big 4 students paid on a per head basis 3 or 4 times as much, and that was your real money. And you had to have those courses running because you just needed, you really just needed 2 or 3 free of the non-Big 4 students, and that broke even as well. So your profit came up there. Right, the rivalry therefore was intense. There was certainly 1 company, maybe 2 companies based permanently in Moscow with permanent staff on here every single day phoning up, what can we do to the companies that they didn't have contracts for. And then there were other companies like BPP that were always desperately trying to come in. And then there were smaller little agencies. Even one of the universities was running ACCA courses with photocopies of notes, and then of course PwC did it themselves. So, right, go back to where you've been. Michael Porter, the 5 forces. Now you've got 2 specifics here. One is the guy's name, so you need to know his name. If you can't remember it in the exam, okay. But the second thing is look at the particular scenario. You cannot just write this thing and chuck it into any scenario. It's the 5 forces that shape competition. Okay, so you must use it in that scenario if you get that scenario. If you get a different scenario, then you can't use it. Okay. Okay, now we're moving on to slide number 7. I think this one is the impact of stakeholders. Right, let's just stop it and look at what we're talking about so far. We're focusing on question number 1. Question number 1 is going to be 2, 3, 4 sides of A4 text about a certain scenario. You'll then be given 3, 4, 5 questions on that. So you get part A, part B, part C, maybe even a D and an E. When you get those parts, what will probably happen is you'll be asked to comment. So when we look at the comment, what you're looking for is a tool, and the tool will give your answer structure. So we started off by looking at environmental analysis, then we looked at PEST, and those 2 things are very, very similar. And those are kind of like corkscrews or tin openers that you can use in many, many different scenarios. So what will happen if, and I gave you the example there where we had the example of a couple who moved from Britain to France to open a Greek restaurant. Again, we see other things as well. Those kind of things. We have medium-sized companies that are being squeezed as well, are being pushed by big international companies, and how do they compete and maintain profitability is another popular one. Then we moved on and we looked at Michael Porter, and we looked at rivalry in the industry, and Michael Porter gave you this idea of, of the five different forces. Now, what's happening is that you're being given a scenario, being given a scenario, and we have to look at the impact of stakeholders. So you've got a different kind of scenario being given here now. And there was a question that came up on this, must have been about the turn of the century, a long time ago now, sort of the year 2000 around then, but it was about a theatre. And we had a theatre, and what happened was that the theatre was partly government funded and partly funded by ticket sales, and it was losing money. In fact, I don't think it was a theatre, I think it was a cinema. And so a guy had been brought in, and he'd been brought in to turn the performance round. And what he found was that they were showing, Shakespeare, for example. And when they showed Shakespeare, people who liked Shakespeare were obviously very, very pleased about that, but not many people came to see it. When they showed Mad Max or something, then the place was full. But of course, the people said, well, that's not what your role is. You're government funded because you're government funded. And you had they had terms of reference. The terms of reference said that they were there to provide certain sorts of fringe cinema and cinema that wouldn't normally be so popular. So they got caught in this trap. They'd got caught in the trap that they were showing the cinema they were supposed to show. As a result of that, they were losing money. When they were losing money, they were being criticised by the government, so they started showing Mad Max. Revenues went up, profits increased, but of course the die-hard people who followed this then were unhappy that they were sort of selling their soul. So that's a really good scenario that we see, where government agencies or certain bodies that have a certain fairly narrow mandate to operate discover that it doesn't have mass appeal. You move out of that into the mainstream, and when you move into the mainstream, the financial side picks up, but that sort of moral side, the people that were there behind you start to get unhappy, and they're unhappy because of what you're doing. Right, that is our background. We therefore have to look at our stakeholders. So what does this slide give you? Slide number 7 gives you a list of the stakeholders. What are you going to do with this? You're going to learn it. Then in the exam, you're going to say, okay, well, this is what's happening with our cinema, with our theatre. How does it impact each of them? What is the impact of the stakeholders? So we look at the managers. So let's start at the top. So what are you going to say about the managers in our scenario? Well, if you have your managers there, they're getting pressure from two different sides, the financial side and the paying customers. From the financial side, everything is better because more money coming in. If you've got more money coming in, and the usual argument that you'll see in these things is that people will push for the financial side, and then they'll say, well, more money coming in means we can run more. We can run more Shakespeare. We can run more Philip Marlowe. We can run more opera and so on. It just has to have funny times. That's all. So the pressure you see the pressure on the managers there. And what is their impact on strategy? The only other thing I would say that you often find as well, where you have these kind of fringe organisations, you'll find that some of the you'll see a split in the management. Some very, very keen to stick with the traditional route, the traditional way, while others are kind of pushing to go, no, let's get the money up here. So we've got, what's the impact of the managers? What can the managers do? And ultimately the managers, assuming it includes the directors, will be the ones who actually make the decisions. The employees, you tend to find, if it's a cinema, that the employees not so very much. If it's a theatre, then the power and the interest of the employees, because they are actors who are sort of professionals in their field, will be much greater. But the impact on the employees is not so very much. The employees in our scenario would probably want to see a better financial management system, because if they have a better financial management system, then what happens is their jobs become more secure. They can ask for more wages. If they're on an hourly basis, they get more hours and they're earning more cash. Or, it becomes a more attractive place to work, so you maybe want less hours because you've got kids at school, blah, blah, blah. So usually employees will be more driven by the financial side in a business like that. The customers, your problem with the customers is that the ones who are really loud and vocal will be the customers who want you to stick with Shakespeare and opera, whereas the ones who come to watch Mad Max will come watch Mad Max and go home again, and they won't have that kind of loyalty to you. Your customers, particularly if you have season tickets or people who sponsor seats and people who donate funds, they're probably there because of what your mandate is. And so therefore those ones, the unhappy ones, will have a much louder voice than the happy ones. And in fact, that's in every business. So we've got this scenario, we've got a theatre, it's moving away from its traditional showcase base towards more popular films because of financial pressures. The managers, the question will tell you, but it's probable that the managers are split because half of them want to watch opera all day and half of them just want to keep their jobs. Employees probably going to be more financially driven. The customers, who are the ones who take an interest, who fill in the forms and who will write to the local member of parliament and so on, are likely to be driving you back towards your traditional roots. Who knows? Suppliers, I would imagine in a theatre or a cinema that your suppliers are fairly low. And once again, you'll probably find if your suppliers are supplying you with Mad Max, they'll be much more in a position to do marketing and so on and so forth. Maybe provide you with certain, they'll provide you with God knows what, fridges that show their names and stuff to put their products in. But I wouldn't have imagined the suppliers would be particularly powerful here. Could be wrong. The government, well, once again, if you're in an organisation like that, the government is likely to have a very strong voice. If you have a mandate that says that you have to show Shakespeare, then presumably what will happen then is that some form of negotiation will start as to how many hours a week it has to be Shakespeare, and on the days that it's not Shakespeare, what you can do. It will depend what kind of pressure that your government handler is under. If your government handler is under pressure to make you break even, he'll probably be quite happy to let you just swallow up the fact that you show Shakespeare. Sorry, that you show Mad Max. If he is a particular enthusiast or an ex-actor or something, then he may force you down the Shakespeare rate. You would have to look and see what he was going to do. Your competitors, you probably don't have that many. If you're in a loss-making business, you probably don't have that many anymore. So it's unlikely that your competitors will be that strong. If you're moving toward Mad Max, then you may find that they come out the woodwork. Local cinemas and so on will probably lobby the local council to have you stopped because you're taking customers away from them. Now, if you're showing classic old films, I watched Charade with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn on the plane flying over here. If you're showing classic old films that don't move into their territory, then I guess they probably won't do very much. There may even be some sort of joint work at some point. If you start showing latest brand new releases that are coming out, so the new Mission Impossible and the Minions, I love the Minions, the Minions and so on, then it's probable that they are going to have a voice and that they will try to stop you from entering into competition with them. Because their argument will be that it's unfair. You get government money to compete with them, so give them some government money or stop you competing. Shareholders in an organisation like this, there may not be shareholders. There's probably a council of which some come from the managers, some come from customers and so on. If there are any shareholders, they're probably shareholders because they're big fans of Shakespeare, the opera, so again, they're going to try to push you away from this financial side. Okay, I've given you a scenario. I don't want you to be too bothered about the scenario. That was an old exam question from about 1998, 2000, where we had this, it was a cinema. It was a partly government-funded cinema club. And as part of their mandate, they had to show certain types of films, and they were trying to sneak in Mad Max and so on because they were losing money and the government was putting them under pressure. What I want you to be clear in your head with here is that if we start talking about stakeholders, is that you have that structure. You can list the 7 of them. The question will give you the information, and then from the question you can lift points out. And don't forget, we're going to do questions at the end of this. You can lift points out from the question and then expand them. Structure, structure, structure. I'll get that in straight away now. That's what you've got there. Okay. Okay, so slide number 8 follows on directly from slide number 7. In slide number 7, we looked at who the different stakeholders are. I gave you a little list of them. That will give structure to your answer. Now we have a guy's name. The guy's name is Mendelow, and Mendelow came up with what he called his stakeholder mapping. Right, all that we're doing here is that we're drawing 4 little squares. So you see it says high, low, low, and low, high. Right, on the left, it is telling you how much power do your stakeholders have? So the guys at the bottom have low power and the guys at the top have high power. As you go across the bottom, so the second word, in other words, the first one is how much power do they have is the first word, and the second word is how much interest do they have? How much do they care about this? So therefore, if we look at this, if you look at this, the box which is over on the bottom left, where it says low, low, these are people who have low power and low interest. So low power and low interest. So in terms of your customers, in our scenario, this could be your customers who are only interested in Mad Max. They have low power because they can come or they cannot come, and they have low interest. If they don't watch Mad Max with you, then they'll go buy the video, they'll go watch it somewhere else. As we move across here, therefore, we have people with low power but high interest. So bottom right, therefore, is people who have low power but high interest. Right, these therefore are likely to be your customers who like to watch opera, Shakespeare, and so on and so forth. Because there's really not that much that they can do if you start cutting back on these things. They can write some letters and so on, but they have high interest because you're probably the only person who provides this service. Certainly for me, I support a very, very bad football team, and very, very rarely they are on the television. But when they are on the television and you live abroad, it's almost impossible to get a copy of it or to see what was on the TV, simply because it's not in anyone's interest to show it, and under the TV rights and everything, they're not allowed to put them on YouTube and so on. Right, so therefore we have these people here who have low power and high interest. The box on the top left, therefore, is high power, low interest. So this may be our guys in the government. They are dishing out £25 million a year in various grants. You get £100,000. It's a lot of money to you, but it's nothing to them. All they want is a quiet life. They want to know that you've taken the money, that you've used it to hire some films, to pay some people, and that's absolutely fine. So they potentially, if they're from the government, they have high power. I mean, if it really came push to shove, God forbid it never would, they could take your license away or whatever, but at the end of the day, they're really not particularly interested. And then we have high. So people who have high power and a high level of interest. So this is probably your managers. So the people who run the whole thing. It could also be others who you wouldn't expect. You may find that one guy who particularly likes to come and sit on his own in your cinema and watch opera also happens to be the head of some committee for the local council, and he can close you down at the click of a button. And the whole point of this, therefore, is that you identify people and you see these things. Okay, that's Mendelow stakeholder mapping. We are comparing power and interest. So you have low power, high power, low interest, high interest. In principle, this thing is supposed to be a graph, and you put crosses on the graph. As long as you can remember those 4 headings, it will give you a way to go. Okay, what I've given you therefore, because I think what we're going to do is, when I wrote this, it's lots more slides, but I think we're going to call an end there. That's enough for one lecture. You can go get a cup of coffee now or whatever. What are we doing? Question number 1 is going to be strategy based. You are looking within that strategy base to get some tools. Those tools will give you a structure. So you now have environmental analysis, you have PEST, Michael Porter is specific, you have your stakeholder analysis, and Mendelow's stakeholder mapping. So you've got however many that adds up to 5 or 6 different things that you can use there, which will give you a way of giving your answer structure. And that is what you're always looking for. Okay.